Wonderful. Welcome once again as we continue our conversation, Being Lights in Dark Times, Judaism and Civil Rights Today, as the world is on fire over the darkness of racial injustice burning across North America. We've been asking the question and trying to learn from all of our guests and allies, how are we meant to respond as Jews and as a Jewish community? And the prophetic tradition that goes all the way back to Isaiah 49:6 is very clear in his call. He says to us, be a light unto the nations, or lagoyim. Not only do we follow the path of the prophet Isaiah, but we also walk in the footsteps of our teacher from the seminary where I studied, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King in Selma. And when he did that, he said that he felt as if his legs were praying. And so tonight, we are asking similar questions, and hopefully we'll get some new wisdom of experience from our very special guest, how to be able to effectively be those beacons of light for the world and reconsider the role that Judaism demands of us as allies in the struggle for freedom and justice across religious and racial divides. And so tonight, we're very honored to be able to welcome back a friend who reached out to me and gave me the opportunity to begin to get to know her when we first spoke in my synagogue a number of months ago. Martine St-Victor was born in Trois-Rivières to Haitian parents. She's communication strategist and founder of Milagro Public Relations Atelier and does a lot of really interesting work in her relationship to her beloved Haiti. And I wanted to welcome her and thank her first of all for her time in this discussion together.
Thank you for having me.
It's really an honor. Martine, I wanted to know maybe if you could just start by sharing with us just a little bit of your background, your story. Who are you and where are you coming from in this conversation so we can appreciate and understand your experience?
Well, as you mentioned, I was born in Trois-Rivières. My parents immigrated from Haiti in 1968. And we moved to Montreal when I was 9, so I've been here for a while, and I lived in the United States for 4 years. After university, came back, started my own PR company. And as you know, Rabbi, when I moved to Montreal at the age of 9, I went to a French lycée, and in my group of friends, half of them were Jews, which for me was quite an introduction because in Trois-Rivières, I never interacted with Jews. I went to a Catholic school, so it wasn't. And you know, when you're a child, your friends are the ones you make at school. Period. And so when I came to Montreal, it was quite an opening, quite an introduction, quite an education, and I've been lucky to still have these friends today. And what I realized over the years is that the similarities are uncanny between the Jewish upbringing and the Haitian upbringing, because the epicenter is always family, and that doesn't change. And the epicenter is family, the epicenter is generosity. And, you know, one of our mantras in Haiti is, if there's room for 4, there's room for 5. So, and I find this, you know, this philosophy to be a common ground with my Jewish friends. And I went to Israel twice. I executive produced a TV series on Israel that aired on the Travel Network a few years ago. And so, and I've done work with the CJA here. And so my connection is very, very deep and very natural. There's no, it's a perfect fit. It's just, you know, there's a lot of, in French we say complicité between me and my friends. And so what I've done with my work as well is use my platform, because I have columns on the CBC radio, TV, on Radio Canada as well. And so I always use my platforms to change the narratives of stories that we think we know, but we don't know. And this came into fruition after the earthquake in Haiti, because the images that kept on coming out from Haiti were only images of devastation, where that is only part of the story. And so I've always used my media platforms to change that, not to change it, but at least to add another one to the existing narrative that we're so used to hearing. And the parallels that I've done as far as media perception when it comes to Haiti is the one that the media has of Israel. And this is why when I co-executive produced the TV series on Israel, my goal was to show Israel in another light than the one that people here have seen, which is always political conflict. And so that was my mission with the show. That's my continuing mission with Haiti, is to show another side, another story. And I find that all these things that I've learned about how to tell a story, a different story, are of great usage today with what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, which is, hey, guys, there's something else. Yes, the murder of George Floyd has been a tipping point, but there are other aspects to that. There are things we've been ignoring for too long, and the people who tell the stories have to be different, and we have to have diversity in the newsroom. And so, because the media is the most powerful tool that we have, it's the most unifying tool that we have. Television, for example, can be one of the greatest educational tools. It's certainly one of the most popular. It's certainly the one that reaches the most people. And so the stories we tell have to come from a place of authenticity, and it can only be just one voice. It has to be multiple voices. And so that really is my mission today, to make sure that there are more people seated around the table, more people telling a story, so we can have different point of views.
Wonderful. Well, the work you're doing sounds incredibly inspiring, and I'm grateful to know that you're out there doing that work and you're using those platforms in such challenging and powerful ways. I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, and then I'm going to also allow some of the other folks that are here to ask questions too. But you mentioned a couple of things that I thought were really interesting. One of them was, you mentioned about this experience of growing up with friends and a certain kind of complicité that you have, that you're really connected with each other. And I'm wondering if we can learn something from the wisdom of your experience of what it is about the way that you approach friendship that makes you so open to creating these friendships with people. Because it's not a given that someone who looks different than me or acts different than me or eats different than me is necessarily going to be my friend. But what is it about your upbringing, and maybe it'll give us more of a window into the current challenges and celebrations of the Haitian community here in Quebec, but what is it about where you're coming from that gives you that generosity of spirit, and what can we learn from that?
Well, I can take none of the credit for that. I have to give all the credit to my parents. You can imagine two young Blacks moving to Trois-Rivières out of all places in 1968. They had to, they had to find a way to connect. And I think I've always been a minority in my environment. And so it's always to go with what you have in common. When you're a teenager, it's easy. What you have in common is music, is the clothes you want to wear. So it's easier to build bridges. And so what I've learned from my parents, it's always to ask the person, what do they like? What are they reading? What music are they listening to? And this is my, I have a very deep love and affection for pop culture. And I think popular culture is one of those bridges. And so even in my adult life, most of the boardrooms I walk into, no one looks like me in those boardrooms. And so I always have to put my work first, and then I have the same language with the people around the board table, the boardroom, in the boardroom. And so from that, we build bridges. I think obviously it hasn't been, I'm not going to say I haven't had hurdles. I have, but I find that, and I tell this story often. The first time I arrived in Tel Aviv, and the first couple of days, some places I went, I kind of stuck out, and people were like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And the minute I said, I'm just here for vacation, boom, all the walls were down, and then it was fine. When people know that you want to learn more from them, the barriers fall. And when I travel to Haiti with white friends, I always tell them, be the first one to say hello. So if you walk in somewhere, and you're the first one to say hello, I find that the barriers fall, the walls fall, It's a very simple gesture, but it's very efficient.
One of the things that you talked about, shared love of culture, and I know that immediately what drew me into this comfort level with you, I don't know if you felt this way, but I felt immediately connected to you because I wanted to find someone I could talk to about my favorite French author that no one seems to know about in my
Yeah.
community, who wrote the book Comment faire l'amour avec un aigle sans se fatiguer.
Mhm.
What's the name of my favorite author?
Dany Laferrière.
Right. And so you not only did you know the book, but you know him. And
Yeah.
I was completely awestruck right away. And I thought,
And
wow,
I
you
told
love Israel and I love Dany Laferrière, and now we have so much, we're thick as thieves together, right?
yeah, I told them about you.
Did
And
you?
so, yes, and so it was a fun time. I told him, I said, I went to speak at a synagogue. The rabbi is a fan, and he was like, "This is perfect." And you know what he told me? He
Right.
goes, "This is the role of literature. Literature is meant to connections,
That's right.
breaking down the language barriers.
Mhm.
This is why you want your books to be translated, so you can connect on the same emotions, on the same words, etc." So he was quite pleased by the connection.
That's amazing.
Mm.
So would you, we're going to go to questions in a minute, Paul, but I want to just ask one more quick one, if I may,
Sure.
is how are you doing right now in this moment? Like one of the things we're learning, and I'm learning about allyship, is that it's really important to be able to understand where you are located in your life and in your world and with your community. How are you doing, and how is your community doing? And what are the challenges that you and your community are facing in this very, very, as you said, the tipping point has been tipped, this climate that is so tense? How are you managing?
Well, on a personal level, my heart has been in my throat for 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks, and there's a lot of frustration on my part because I can't believe that's what it took for people to realize there is systemic racism, there is police brutality. So there is this frustration. My brother's Black. I have a nephew who's mixed race. So I have that fear of them running into the wrong police officer. That is real. That is a fear that my mother has had all her life. That is a fear that all the women in my life who have Black men in their lives are dealing with. That's a reality. And so the frustration comes from the fact that, these Black men were never believed before. And so because I work in the media, I work in PR, and I study brands and I study media. And so when I see brands coming out and saying, we're supporting the movement, okay, great. Show me the makeup of your board of trustees. Is there any diversity there? So words are cheap. So my work right now, my focus is to make sure there is diversity, make sure there's inclusion in different institutions, so we can break the cycle of this systemic racism, which is real. All the studies prove it. The numbers are here. I'm kind of in awe that I live in a province where the premier won't recognize it. That puts him in the same corner as Donald Trump, which is not a corner you want to be in. That makes you definitely on the wrong side of history. So a lot of sadness, but a lot of frustration, and rolling up my sleeves to be part of the solution. For me, that's very important. And so complaining doesn't solve any problems. I'm very aware of that. And so it's really to create platforms where, like I said before, stories can be told and where people can be believed and heard. And so as far as community, I think what's really nice, and what I've heard from people who have been in various civil rights movements for years, people like John Lewis, for example, Jesse Jackson, when they tell you they've never seen what they're seeing now, where they have hope because what they've seen, what they're seeing now is completely different than what they've seen in the past and what they've mentioned. And you were asking, Rabbi, about allyship. What the Jesse Jacksons and the John Lewis of this world were saying is, well, now in the marches in the street, there's diversity.
Mm.
And people demanding justice, there are different voices.
Mhm.
And so you feel this support, you feel this this allyship you see it, you feel it, but you see it as well. And so for that brings me hope, which is why I know we can break through this. I know we can find a solution. I also find that I deal with businesses a lot, and I know the way they listen today is different. And so, for example, I've been talking with clients and say, okay, guys, what are we doing? How are we setting the table differently? And the way they're listening is different, which is much more attentive, taking more notes, really taking a step back to take the time to listen. And I think we're at this part in the solution. Excuse me, the part of listening and then seeing how together we can come up with a solution.
Wonderful. Did you have a question?
Well, I was actually wanting to go back to what you said about literature being a bridge and pop culture being a bridge. And so when you say that, I totally agree that, it's a place where we can find each other in a common space and share like, likes and dislikes and similarities. But what I wonder about is how much of that culture is really accessible or to people that are outside of your communities. Like, what should we be reading? What should we be listening to? What is that culture that's coming from from your world that should be that we should be paying attention to, reading or listening to? Does that make sense? What I'm saying? Because what pop culture often it often tells the story of the majority.
Yeah, correct. It's I'm loving that you brought this up, because for the past 3 weeks I've had friends, white friends, telling me, what should I listen to? What should I be reading? Who should I be following on social media? And I always tell them, start with Google, and the research that you're doing is part of the journey. Do you know? And so I could tell you what to read. I could tell you the Tanahashi codes, but that's my point of view, and I cannot speak for a community. And so in the research that you're doing, that journey is important, because you will, when you're doing the research, you will connect to some authors more than others. You will connect to authors in a way that I'm not going to connect. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to shortchange you. I don't want to make a recommendation based on my likings, because I don't represent a whole community. But so that's part of the journey, and that's what I've been telling all the friends that reached out to me.
But Martine, I want to push you a little further, though.
Sure.
You're very humble, but you're also very knowledgeable. And part of these conversations is about educating ourselves in my community. So I happen to love French literature, and I happen to have the treat of discovering Danny Lafreniere when I was studying actually Canadian literature. He was not, when I was in university, on the syllabus. But
he's not even on the syllabus in French schools here.
So it already tells you a lot, right? But I discovered it, like you said, I discovered it because I was working at Coach House Press. That was the first publishing company to publish the translation of that book from French into English. So I discovered it backwards. But I'm really curious about the Haitian Quebecois community, if that's the right way to describe the multicultural fabric here. How are they doing? And also, what are the things that we can do as a Jewish community to become more aligned with, familiar with, and empathic to where they're at right now? And maybe the cultural link is the first step. I don't know, but how can we learn more and be better allies to that part of the community?
Well, as far as learning, I have to tell you, there's a publishing house based in Montreal called Mémoire d'Encrier, and I'll send you the links to that. And it's a publishing house that's headed by a Haitian Canadian, and he puts forward a lot of Black authors. So he publishes Danny Lafreniere, actually. Okay. And so just looking at their portfolio, his portfolio will give you an insight. So that's one thing. As far as, what to do, I always find that particularly you, Rabbi, because you're in a leadership role, you need to reach out to your counterparts. You need to reach out to priests. You need to reach out, it starts there. And also because the church has such a essential part in the Haitian life, in the Haitian community. So you have to reach out to your counterparts. That's number one. And I'm very, and the people who come to your synagogue also have to reach out to churches. And so I think you have to take the lead on that, because people from the synagogue will follow you, will follow your lead. And I'm very, there are symbols to me that I have seen that have profoundly changed me. And so I often talk about the images that I see from the civil rights movements, the marches that I see, and I see, you know, Frank Sinatra next to Martin Luther King, next to Harry Belafonte, and those mark me because it's not about doing the right thing, it's about doing the brave thing. And I think when you take a stand and when you step forward, that's being brave. And those are the things that make a difference. And I'll give you an example, a recent example. After the shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, and I saw this on 60 Minutes, the local mosque, you know, because the Jews were, as you know better than I do, very afraid, very, you know, afraid to go to the groceries, afraid to do what they had to do. And so the imam of the local mosque went to the synagogue. Less than 24 hours, there was a celebration of life, of the people who had passed. And the imam said, okay, we understand that you're scared, so we're going to go do the groceries for you. And if you want, we will ensure security at the synagogue. And we have raised X, you know, amount of money, and we're here for you. And that's one image that marked me, because and I don't know if you remember this, Rabbi, but when I spoke at the synagogue, I said, you know, the people who don't like Jews don't like blacks, and people that don't like blacks don't like Jews. So we're fighting the same evil, if you will.
I remember, yeah.
And when there was the killing at the mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, the same thing happened. The Jewish community really stepped up. And so the rabbi went to see the imam and said, do you need security? We'll give it to you. Are you guys afraid to leave your house and do the groceries and, you know, do the daily things that will do them for you? And for me, it's doing the right thing, but it's also being brave. And so it's these type of gestures that make a big difference. And so I remember after the earthquake in Haiti, so many people came up to me and said, which organization can we help? Because we'll do it. And they did. And when there was the big Lac Mégantic, I was going to say event, it's not an event, when the tragedy happened where it blew up half of the town, I saw leaders from various communities, from various religions, you know, really stepping up to Lac Mégantic, calling the mayor and say, how can we help you? And I think in this case, what we're going through right now is to really reach out to the organizations and say, organizations that do social insertion and that fight for social justice, that fight for equality, we have to support them. We all know without money, you're stuck. And so we have to finance them so they can continue the work that they've already been doing. And so that's one part. And I think in all of our respective circles, our businesses, we need to be more inclusive. And you were asking how I've been feeling. Yes, my heart's been in my throat, but I've also had a little bit of guilt in the past 3 weeks and a half, because I'm privileged, I'm lucky, I've never been really slowed down or stopped. I have access. And so the guilt comes from asking the question, have I been doing enough? Have I been pulling up people enough? Have I been, opening doors enough for people who haven't had the same chances? And so that has led me to the conclusion that I haven't. It's not enough. You have to do more. And so I think this is reflection that we all need to do. Have I been doing more? Have I been reaching out more? Have I been a good neighbor? Have I been a good colleague at work? And so all these steps will, I think we need to start small. I believe in community. And so all these, we have to be the first domino in our own community. We have to. First domino, it falls, and then everybody else will follow. So this is why, Rabbi, I really invite you to take the lead in your congregation. Invite our friends at the synagogue to follow your lead.
Thank you. That's a great challenge, Martine. We're going to talk offline about some strategies for doing that together. I'm gonna learn from your wisdom. I wanted to let folks ask a couple questions, if that's okay. I know that Paul has been waiting anxiously. Paul Grafe wanted to ask a question.
Hello, Paul.
Hi, Martine. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? It's good to see you.
You too. Sorry, my background is in Indigenous broadcasting in Ganawage, but background in sports broadcasting beforehand. And one of the things I've been thinking about and have been impressed by is finally we've heard from Michael Jordan. We've heard from LeBron James. We've never heard from them in the past. And one of the things that's really struck me this whole time is that some of the most famous people in the history or modern history have been African American. Muhammad Ali, LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods. How do you see something like that, you know, masses and masses of people adore these athletes of color, and on the other hand, they're calling the rest of the race names?
Mm-hmm.
You're doing far worse.
Yes. I loved it. First of all, Paul, I could speak about sports for days. My dream is to have a show on sports radio. That is my dream. Couple of things. LeBron James has been speaking out. He's never stopped. He's always been very involved in the community. 3 years ago, when Eric Garner died in the same way that George Floyd did, LeBron was one of the first ones to take a step. He, if you remember, he made the T-shirt "I Can't Breathe," and he wore it, and everybody else wore it. So he's always been very vocal, so much so that he's been very criticized on conservative media. Example, Fox News, where he was told "shut up and dribble." So Michael Jordan, for me, as you know, he stepped up in the last
Couple of weeks,
10 days. He committed to $10 million $100 million with Nike over the next 10 years. And so the criticism of Jordan over the years is that he never stepped up, and he never, and in his and I know it's disappointing. In his defense, I always say the same thing. Not everybody has to be Martin Luther King. We have to respect that. I also think that you become an activist when you're ready for that. And now he's ready. So we have to take it for what it is. Tiger Woods is not even close to being there yet. It's going to take Tiger Woods another 15 years. And you know when it's going to happen for Tiger Woods? The day he's in a neighborhood where they don't recognize him and the police rough him up. And
is that possible?
That's possible. You know, it happened there's a tennis player called James Blake, who's of mixed.
Yeah.
He was coming out of a building in the Upper East Side in New York, I believe, and they mistook him for someone else. Cops jumped on him, threw him to the floor, didn't recognize him. That happens, and there are countless stories like that of people that are famous and got roughed up. So I think, and when you look at the way Colin Kaepernick has been treated, the risks are very, very high. And so this is why I was saying before, it's not about doing the right thing, it's about doing the brave thing. But there's a risk to that. I think in the past, we've had many various leaders of the Black community, of various areas, who have come forward and given money and time. And so as far as sports, excuse me, there's something about sports that I always say, once you win, people don't see your color. They don't care, right?
You see, and that's it. That's the point I wanted to make here. I mean, you and I could probably talk sports and put everybody else to sleep in this conversation, but I'm more about how, racist people can love the Michael Jordans and Tiger Woods of the world and yet still be racist on the other hand.
That's P.K. Subban. I mean,
sure.
P.K. Subban is a great example. People loved him, and then they didn't. And when they stopped loving him, the criticism was extremely harsh. And if you went online, extremely racist. And so I don't know how to explain it. What I can tell you is that I'm very disappointed in hockey players who haven't come out to denounce, there have been so many racist incidents in the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
Sidney Crosby's of the world never came out to say, we're against this, blah, blah, blah. So in that sense, I'm very disappointed because they didn't do the brave thing, right? And so I don't know, Paul. I don't know how to explain how people can love somebody, I just know people love winners. And so once you win, it's like in the 80s, everybody loved the Cosby Show. Oh, Bill Cosby, he's black. No one realized he was black because he was all over TV. It's like today in Oprah. I mean, there's a lot of people love Oprah and don't love black people. It's this dance with success, money, and identity. And so we live in a society where money and success trumps everything else. So I guess that's one of the explanations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Were there other questions anyone wanted to share who's here? I can see Rosa is there as well, and Colin is here too. Before we close, if there's no other questions, I did want to ask you, Martine, if you can just give us a message of hope for the next generation. What words of encouragement do you have in these dark times about how the next generation can be lights unto the nation and to really to their communities and to their families and to do the work that needs to be done? You've given us some advice, but if you were talking now for a moment and you had 2 minutes to give words of encouragement to the next generation and hope, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I think everything starts at home. And so children notice what parents say and what they do. And so if parents are open, if parents have diversity in their circles, or that will reflect on the kids. Also, I'm extremely hopeful because when I talk to teenagers and young adults, particularly teenagers, they are way ahead of us by light years. There are a lot of barriers that they don't have. And when I speak to them, I see them seeing people for who they are, not where they come from, what they are. And so, and I see this not only in race, but also in gender and sexuality. I think they're absolutely ahead of us. And so in that sense, I'm not worried at all. I look at the kids who sabotaged the Trump rally over the weekend. Teenagers know how to mobilize. This is what they have that we don't have. They know how to mobilize, and I saw it after the shooting in Florida 2 years ago, how fast they mobilized and marched to the Senate in Washington, to the Capitol in Washington. So in that sense, I feel, and also there's something very important about teenagers. They spend their money at the right place. And so they're pressing brands to do the right thing, right? And this is what we don't have. They have this commitment. And so I think in that sense, we can absolutely follow the lead of teenagers.
Thank you, Martine, so much for inspiring us and challenging us. And I send my blessings to you, to your family, and to your community. And I look forward to continuing the conversation, the allyship, and learning more from you as time goes on. But know that you are always welcome in our community, and hopefully soon we'll be able to open up our doors again and welcome you back. And I look forward to being able to, once doors open again, to be a guest in your community too.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Shalom to everyone.
Thank you.
Shalom. Thanks, Martine.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.